Thanks for carving out time to join us. My name's Julie Cater, and I lead marketing here at Cyberleaf. And we have a great conversation lined up for today about AI in your business, where it's driving productivity, where it may also be introducing risk that you're not even thinking about. AI is one of those topics where everybody's got an opinion. And when we were planning this content, what we didn't want to do was fall into kind of one of those clickbait buckets where we're either AI is taking over everything and you got to get on board, or this really scary kind of angle that we've also seen play out. And so what we really wanted to do was bring you an honest conversation about AI and take some of the drama out of it and just leave you with some good takeaways on, again, where we're seeing AI deliver real value and where we also want to be thinking about risk in our organizations and how to approach that. So let's get into that today. And I'll start with some intros. So joining me today is Jeff Buss from Cyberleaf. Cyberleaf is a full service cybersecurity company. We're built to help organizations manage risk without slowing down their business. Jeff is a retired Navy captain, started out flying attack jets and capped his military career commanding the DISA Command Center. He has also been a managing director at Ernst & Young and has advised some of the largest U.S. banks, and then served as CIO at Nordic Consulting and Dexian before taking on his role here at Cyberleaf. He has spent his whole career figuring out how to adopt new technology at scale without losing control of it. And so I'm really excited to hear what he has to say today. And so, Jeff, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Julie. Excited to be here, and I want to thank everybody for coming.
Awesome. We also have Tracy from Entech here with us today. He is the Vice President of Technology. He leads Entech's technology strategy, innovation initiatives, cybersecurity programs, automation efforts, and AI adoption. He has more than 2 decades in managed services and cloud technologies and business transformation. He works closely with executive leaders and customers and technical teams to make sure that technology investments map to business outcomes. So really excited about that background and that perspective as well as we get into this today. Just a quick bit about Entech, if that's a name that you're not familiar with. They're Florida-based managed IT services and cybersecurity provider. They support more than 500 organizations across the state of Florida. And for nearly 30 years, they've helped organizations strengthen security, improve operations, and grow through managed IT, cybersecurity, cloud, AI ready. The list goes on. They do a lot. It's very impressive. Very glad to have you here with us today, Steve. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Okay, so let's kick this off with kind of level setting some things. We talked about this in our abstract as we set up this conversation. AI is in every business, whether you meant to roll it out and whether you didn't. And so that has some implications for how we're using it and how it's also introducing risk. So Jeff, I'm going to start with you on this part of the conversation and just ask, from a security perspective, what's the AI conversation that you're having with clients most often right now?
Yeah, great question, Julie, and I appreciate that. I thought I'd start higher level and then I'd roll back down a little bit. So some of the clients we're talking about the strategic level, what's happening with AI right now, it's fascinating, right? So you're seeing all kinds of new technologies. Everything's changing super fast. But I was recently at the Capitol for the National Cyber Innovation Forum, and they talked about a couple big trends, like big stuff, right? Like what keeps you up at night via AI, right? So, and it's pretty interesting to listen to the congressman talk about it. And one of the congressmen talked about, it wasn't that the ransomware, it wasn't the Chinese threat. It was the ever expanding asset base, like a lesson observed. In other words, the attack surface for America has grown and grown, yet we watch the Ukraine war and how they're trying to protect things, right? And limit the exposure and the connections, whereas America's just doing the opposite. We're expanding that connection. The other piece they talked a lot about was who's building the tracks for AI, right? So historically, major technology revolutions have been led by the government. And so with the benefit of US population in mind, and what's happening now is the government is not leading AI innovation, right? So that's being led by NVIDIA and Google and Microsoft and Anthropic and a number of different companies, and a lot of more there. And so their motivation for building that technology is different than how historically technology has been developed. So it's a very interesting nuance to this whole AI piece, which comes into play a little bit later in our discussion. And finally, for small and medium businesses in particular, it's a huge margin call. They call it a margin call for tech debt is what they referred to it as, which I thought was fascinating. Because if you haven't cleaned up your environment, it accelerates those vulnerability, the recognition of those vulnerabilities and the ability to exploit them, which we're seeing happen in the market a lot. So that translates, Julie, down to the conversations that we're having with some of our clients, which are, hey, your chances of getting hacked like 5 or 6 years ago, let's call it maybe 10 to 15% a year, have over doubled, right? So now you're somewhere between 35 and 40% chance is what most small businesses will report, and most like CrowdStrike threat and Verizon threat intelligence report would say. So you got about, let's call it a 40% chance of getting hacked every year now. So it's changed the game. We're acquiring an investment that hasn't been historically needed in a way that Stephen and I deal with on a day-to-day basis, trying to help advise clients, trying to create that prescriptive path from a maturity perspective to get to where you need to get to in order to have a safe environment. So a lot of the conversations we're having are, all right, what's a stepwise? I can't spend a whole bunch of money on this all at once. How do I do this in a prescriptive, orchestrated manner to support the growth of the organization in a secure method?
That makes sense. That makes sense. And I want to shift then to you, Stephen, and ask you from a little bit broader perspective, right? From that IT and ops side. And obviously cyber is a big part of that. But I mentioned over 500 clients that you guys are working with and all the conversations that you're having. When it comes to IT and ops, what's landing on your desk when it comes to AI adoption? What do those conversations sound like?
Yeah, they sound different depending on a variety of factors, especially when you're working across such a diverse client base. You have different size organizations, different vertical markets, and there are some common threads, but there's a lot of differences. I think the biggest thing when you talk about AI adoption is everyone knows they need to do something. They don't necessarily want to be last to market or to have something that becomes an impediment to them doing their business the way they always have. But they're also fearful or maybe even a little bit cautious in terms of how far do I go with this? How real is it that I need to implement some of these technologies? And that's where a lot of times they're looking to us for guidance and really helping them to establish common sense governance or guide rails on how they proceed down this path, but do it in a cautious manner. A lot of organizations, you mentioned this, Jeff, on kind of who's leading the conversation. It's for-profit businesses where it's their job to get you to consume their products. And a lot of businesses are consuming those products, whether they are doing it intentionally or their staff are consuming them unintentionally or without their knowledge. And I think when you talk about AI adoption, what they're seeing is, while it's been adopted, they don't know how to measure the impact that it's having positively or negatively in the business. So that's where they're starting to realize that they've got this situation on their hands that they don't really know the status of it, and they want to establish more of a cohesive strategy and vision. And that's usually where it's, when you say IT and operations, it's not just treating it like a IT tool that gets managed. It's really an operational tool that touches a lot of those things that Jeff covered around tech debt and systems that are in place today. And it's really starting to become more about the outcome rather than just implementing the technology.
Absolutely. Okay. I was going to move on to the next, but I want to stop and take a quick poll because I just want to see from folks that are on right now. So let me launch this. We're going to start this poll. Has your organization formally rolled out AI tools, or is it happening informally? So I'm going to throw this up on the screen for just a second and let you guys see. Can you see that? Is that on my speakers probably can't see that, but I believe that it is. Oh, add to the stream. There we go. Sorry, guys. Okay. And I think this is a really important question for the rest of this conversation, because I think we all know that you can roll out AI in a corp. If we're just talking like Claude and ChatGPT, but there's all of these other embedded AI tools. So I think the question for a lot of people is how we wrap our arms around the things we intentionally did versus the personal accounts that we've got employees using or putting company data into. And that's a potential concern and definitely a potential risk as well. Curious to see where we fall and how many people are doing this formally versus informally. And it looks like over half of our group on today is seeing this happen informally, but there's almost 30% have a formal policy and some approved tools. Great part for this conversation. Really appreciate everyone's participation in that. And with that, then let's roll into the next part of this conversation, and I want to start on the positive side of AI. And Stephen, I want to start with you, and I want to ask some questions about what we're seeing AI do for people. So walk us through, if you would, where you're seeing AI save time, improve outcomes for your clients. And I think more importantly, if you can, to get to what are you seeing that's real versus kind of the theoretical wins that are often talked about?
Yeah, it's the theoretical wins are more prevalent than the real ones because I do think there is a level, and you can see it in the poll there, of organizations that know things are happening, but they're not managing it, or they're just looking the other way. They know people are writing emails, they know people are using it as a muse, or maybe in sales and marketing or things like that, but they don't want to know some of what's going on because then they'd have to address it. For people that are intentionally going down that path and really thoughtfully implementing AI tools, usually it's established processes. Like, for example, if it's in a finance department, which most organizations of any size have some level of finance capabilities, it's things like established processes like a month-end close or a reconciliation of financials, things that might have taken a human a significant amount of time before they're able to cut it down with a repeatable process. And I think that's the key part to focus on is if you don't have a defined process today, then AI is just going to give you what you put into it. Versus if you have already a process, you have documents or artifacts or things that it can really grab hold of, then you're just like anything, just like if we hire a new human, you're able to deliver a much better and much quicker outcome with AI versus you see a lot of these things where people are vibe coding and chatting with AI and it's retrieving data from public sources or things that don't belong to you necessarily. Then you're going to get these kind of fragmented, non-detailed processes or maybe data that doesn't come back in the way that you expect it to. Not to keep going back to it, but it really boils down to tech debt. If you don't have processes and clean data and categorized data and really narrow focus in certain areas, then it's not going to be real. It's going to be theoretical for the most part.
I like that perspective. And just almost there's tech debt, but I almost feel like I heard you describe process debt, right? We
Yeah.
can roll out these new tools, but if we don't have policies and procedures in place to execute them in a scalable way, to your point, a lot of those wins will be those theoretical, why didn't we see this happen for us?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, is there a tool or a workflow that comes to mind that you've seen rolled out or your organization has helped rolled out that's really stuck versus one that's fizzled? Any good examples that come to mind?
Yeah, usually it's something again that's highly specialized. For example, an agent or a repeatable process that is for something like writing an RFP or a grant if you're a nonprofit, or analyzing a subset of data that is clean and it's very narrow. Because that's one of the things too with the AI models that we're using today, at least in most cases, they're just large data processors. So if they have too much data to process or incomplete or complex data that's not categorized or organized for them, then they start hallucinating. I'm sure most people have heard that term, but the longer that the chats get, the more data you feed it, the more data it has access to, the more confused it's going to get versus something specific. Here are 5 examples of really good RFPs that we've written. This is what we're training you on. This is what we only want you to focus on. Then that's going to be more successful than just a mass amount of data where maybe it has drafts or bad examples or other things, and you're just training it on less complete, less organized data.
I've definitely seen that happen in my own use of it, for sure. One more question kind of parked on this topic before I want to ask Jeff something from a different perspective, but I'm curious if what's the biggest gap between what you've seen vendors promise your clients and what their teams have really gotten from them?
Yeah, I haven't seen a lot of vendors promising things. I think it's really the promise of AI being this magic button. You use Claude, you use ChatGPT, Copilot, it doesn't matter. it still requires care and feeding like anything else. And you don't hire an employee and stick them at a desk and say, good luck. Hopefully you deliver value to my organization. You train them, you check in with them, you correct them if they need it. It's the same thing. I think most of the time it's less of a vendor promise and more of a promise that it's not going to take work to get value out of it. AI is not, at least today, to the point where you can just set it loose and just hope for the best. You still have to do a lot of work to get it to where it is delivering value. And I think what I see more often than not is right now, I heard this recently, I loved it. If you think of it like, if any history buffs are out there, if you think of the gold rush that happened in this country and this promise of everyone was going to go west and make it rich, they're going to get all this gold, who actually made the money in all that? It was the people who were selling the tools and the equipment that these people needed to go find the gold. It wasn't that they actually, even if they found gold, that they were making a lot of money from it. So I think it's the same way, whether you say vendors or the AI companies that are driving this, they're driving us all towards a gold rush where they're making money, whether we make any money or deliver any value out of this or not.
That's such a good perspective. And I also wrote down, I loved what you said about kind of the care and feeding of these AI tools. It's a good way to think about it. I love that. Okay, Jeff. So I'm going to switch gears also to you and ask from your viewpoint in the work that you're doing with clients and watching them adopt these tools. Where are you seeing the productivity story and a security story either line up or fight each other?
Yeah, great question. I think the stereotype here, and I caught myself in it the other day. And so we were talking about SOC tools. And I was like, one of the gentlemen that runs our SOC is Nikita Belikov. He's a retired colonel in the Air Force. And he was poking fun at me because I was like, you know what we need? We need more AI. He's like, whoa, like more cowbell, right? So he brought up the Saturday Night Live cowbell commercial. And I'm like, okay, fair. So I see a lot of that in business, right? So AI, to Stephen's point earlier, which is like AI is not going to fix everything, right? So the balancing of security and AI is way out of whack at the moment from what I'm seeing in the market, right? So people are their own ChatGPTs, their own Claude instances on a work computer and blaming security for slowing things down, right? And we're trying to get our arms around from a security perspective, all of these new tools coming in. And we're going to talk more about it following on with questions here in a minute. But a couple of foundational things that I think are really important for that conversation between productivity and security. One is the foundation has to be set. There has to be some policies saying, don't do this, do this. You're allowed to use this. You're not allowed to use that. One of the common things that we do is we'll ask the CEOs, like, how many AI tools do you think you have in your environment? And they'll say, I don't know, like 10, maybe 15. And then we do a scan and there's a couple tools you can use to like, how many AI tools do you actually have? And it's almost always over 100. So you're not even close, right? And then to set up identity and access management is really important, right? So a lot of companies, mid to larger companies, have a tool to help you do that. Some of the smaller ones use tools like Microsoft, Google, et cetera, right? But trying to figure out how to set up the identity so your identity can access certain parts and pieces. And we use role-based access control to do it. So setting up identity, making sure that's solid is step number one, I think. And number two is the data hygiene, right? So Stephen talked about it. I'll talk about it a lot more going forward here. But well, your data, CRM, just think about CRM, ERP type data. Is it well groomed and easy to use? Or is it all over the place? Do you have 5 different CRMs or 5 different ERPs like a lot of companies do, where they bought a company and it doesn't really work and the fields don't match and you're trying to use all of that in AI? Garbage in, garbage out is absolutely true with AI, and we see it all the time. So trying to get quality, right access, the right quality are two of the big areas, and it's really about laying that foundation. And if you haven't done it, again, going back to tech debt and doing the due diligence, it looks a lot like hard work getting the data right, and it looks a lot like hard work getting your identity and access management set up. Once you've done that, the productivity increases dramatically, right? So it's a really interesting and really fun thing to watch for companies. So once they've got those two in particular set up, it's really fun to watch.
Can you elaborate on something that you just said? Because I think it might be helpful as a good reminder for anyone that's on. How does a company who thinks they have, for instance, 20 AI tools in their environment really have over 100? Are those all standalone Claudes and ChatGPTs of the world? Or where else is AI working its way into our environments without us really realizing we've given it access?
Yeah, I think the shadow AI discussion is significant, right? So you're seeing it like Grammarly and like all of these, P systems, CRM systems have AI built into them, and you have no idea where the data is going. You don't sign anything when you bought it. There was no like, hey, just a disclosure. We're going to take this and we're going to train all of our other data based on your data. And so that's where we're seeing hundreds and hundreds of different AI connections going out, data going to places. And once you inserted the prompt or dumped in the finance documents, there's no log source that I can track. It's very difficult for us to manage. And that data is now gone. And you have to assume that it's up being used for a variety of different purposes, which you may or may not agree with.
Yeah, Grammarly is such a great example because when I started using Grammarly a long time ago, it wasn't ingesting, and the AI wasn't the conversation it is today, and it sure has changed over that time. So, okay, this is the perfect segue then into moving this conversation a little bit more onto the risk side of things, because every upside has a flip side, right? We've already started this topic, but let's, Jeff, talk about the risk that you're seeing that a lot of leaders aren't thinking about as it relates to these AI tools.
Yeah, I think it's twofold. One is the one we just talked about. I think the shadow AI and not having a policy, not having any means to control it is a big risk. And it's something that it's evolving. And you would ask me a year ago, I would have said, no, we'll be fine, right? But in the past year, it's become a problem, like a big problem. And then number two is the speed with which you're able to exploit vulnerabilities. CrowdStrike had this model, still has it, like 1 minute to alert, 10 minutes to investigate, 60 minutes to remediate. 11060, they call it. And so it was designed to beat the Russians and the Chinese, the advanced persistent threats. And what we're seeing now is 11060 is gone. And it's for a SOC, security operations center, that's trying to monitor. That's pretty fast, right? So you've got to be really good to get to 11060. And now it's 110, 15, maybe 20. So that speed by which, because they can have the script already ready to go. So once they exploit your system, they run the script and exfil in minutes. And it's really hard to stop and catch in that sort of speed. So that loop is getting smaller and smaller. So your time with these vulnerabilities is getting very small. So to catch it and to stop it.
Sure. Okay. And then I think the other thing, because we talked about all that shadow AI, but I think that the other question related to that, and maybe this is more of a leadership question versus just, I think we all know that when somebody puts company data into one of those tools or client data into one of those tools, that's a big no-no. That's a bad thing unless it's got the guardrails and it's protected. So articulate to their employee base what the real exposure is when they paste that client or company data into a public AI tool. What is it that gets missed in that exposure conversation?
Yeah, I think especially with our defense industrial based clients, right? CUI is super sensitive in that space. I think having a conversation with the workforce going, let me flip it for a second. So our AI pen test, where we'll come in and we'll look at all your data that's flowing out to these AI tools. You're able to do that. When we do it, what we find is your chat GPT for your personal account, when you log into your work computer, all that data goes with it. So when you type it in, so I can see all of your personal stuff if you load it on your work computer from a monitoring perspective, which means I know what questions you're asking. And it's most employees don't realize that that's happening, right? So it's a privacy concern, right? Because now all those questions get popped up. And it's from a legal perspective, we haven't caught up with that yet. So the legal policies, I don't know that the legal for a lot of firms fully understands that data is now visible across the network. So that's one. And I think legal having that conversation, but I think that's, Julie, where you start with policies, right? So you say, hey, here's what's allowed, here's what's not allowed. And then you set controls on top of it in order to enforce those. Is the only way that I know how to do that and really to control the environments.
That's a perspective that I don't think employees realize what they've exposed to the rest of their company when they put their personal information or use that shadow IT is as much an exposure for them personally. I appreciate that perspective. Okay, Stephen, I want to follow up or ask you, from what you're seeing with your client base, how much of this risk is coming from sanctioned tools versus employees, that shadow IT employees working around IT entirely?
I waffle between this. I think this could just be me being optimistic. I don't think that most employees wake up and think I'm going to work around the cybersecurity controls or any sort of I'm gonna use a unsanctioned AI tool today. I think most of the time it's that either a policy doesn't exist or it's not clear enough that they know exactly what they should or shouldn't be doing. And I think really it's going back to why are people using AI? They're trying to make their job easier. Maybe they're Maybe they know that if they did something manually, it'd take them 3 hours versus that they fire it up in an AI tool, it might take them an hour, and they're looking to impress their boss or get home to their family or whatever it is. So they're looking for speed and efficiency and doing a good job. And they don't necessarily think about some of these things like what Jeff just said around each public exposure or that kind of stuff. They're just thinking about how can I get my job done quickly or the most efficient. So I think it falls on us as employers to give people the right tools to bring it out in the open. The reason why it's called shadow AI is it's done in the shadows because people are fearful of admitting that they're using AI tools. And that's why we're here right now. We know everyone's using AI tools. We know there's probably even more than what businesses realize is being used. And bringing it out in the open and making it not this thing where people are ashamed of it will then actually improve cybersecurity, make sure that people are doing it the right way. So I think there's a lot of elements of just when people hear policy or governance, they think that's Big Brother telling people exactly what to do. It's more like just giving them acceptable use, saying these are the ways that you should use these things. These are ways that we don't want you to use them, or that, and here's the risks, or here's the associated reasons why that shouldn't happen. And I wanted to say a couple of other things, specifically like when we're talking about things like connections versus tools, that's the other thing is a lot of times people don't realize they're using AI. So if you're not controlling some of those things, like whether it's Grammarly or anything else, nobody reads those super long policies that say what people are going to do with your data. But it's on us as cybersecurity and IT providers, along with our customers, to make sure that we spell out, here's how we can control some of that stuff to prevent somebody from unknowingly entering this data where they're trying to do a great job. That this vendor just came out with this new thing that promises to cut down how long it takes to analyze this data or to make it easier to write things, deliver marketing, whatever it is. So I think that's where we don't do a great job sometimes on explaining that it's not just about people firing up ChatGPT or Claude in a personal account. It's also doing these things that where vendors or other systems are unknowingly, or employees are unknowingly using AI to do these activities.
I appreciate that perspective so much. And I think there's also something to be said then for helping them use AI in a way that's beneficial and safe and making it safe for them to admit that these are the tools that they're using. But there's also a big productivity gain, right? When you can help your employees understand not only should you be using this, and this is great that you're using it, but here's some ways that you could even level up, right? And so if it's safe to disclose that you're working with a certain tool, we can help you use that in the best way. So I want to throw up another poll real quick. This will take 30 seconds, but I think that it's timely to ask just what's your biggest barrier to putting some of these guardrails in place? So if you would, just throw your answer in there and let us know how you're thinking about some of these AI governance and guardrails, and we'll talk about some steps that we can take here in just a second, but I'll let that sit there for just a moment. Interesting to see the numbers shift back and forth as we see some pop in, and worried that it will slow the team down. I actually thought that one would be a lot higher. Maybe it will be at the end.
I think it's interesting that leadership isn't prioritizing it, but nobody's answered that. But if you're in this meeting right now, you're probably prioritizing it. It's just needing some guidance and direction.
Yeah. All right. Well, I will keep us moving. Thank you, everyone, for participating in that. And I will keep us rolling along. So let's shift a little bit to talk about some of the regulated industries that I know both of our organizations work with. So starting with you, Jeff, for clients specifically under CMMC or that are handling, you hit on this a little bit, that are handling that CUI, how does that change what safe AI use looks like?
Yeah, it's pretty well defined in CMMC 2.0, even at 1.0 when you do the self-assessment, but there are no AI tools allowed to touch CUI, right? So it's a very clear, clean. And so Claude, ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, none of them are allowed in GCC High at the moment. Copilot, I think, is getting close. They've in talks with Microsoft and listening to some of their briefs. It sounds like that's going to happen at some point, but it is not allowed at the moment. So that keeps it pretty clean.
Yeah.
And with the suspension of phase 2, I would argue that doesn't give you a license to add it in or to dump an ECUI into that space. I would just be very careful with it and that data should be completely outside of any environment that can touch AI, which with a GCCI environment, obviously it is. So yeah, treating any CUI as out of bounds for AI is generally our recommendation. And that may change in the future. I'm sure it will. But for right now, for the foreseeable future, that's how we approach it.
They sure made that black and white. Okay, so Stephen, on the healthcare side of things, because when we think about, for instance, HIPAA is not a certification, it's a law, right? And so that's a little bit different. So I'd love to hear your perspective on what does PHI exposure risk look like once AI tools are in your healthcare environment? Speak that for a second.
I think it doesn't make it any more or less risky having AI tools in the environment with PHI. It's about the same kind of thing. Are people treating them as out of bounds for HIPAA when they're not? So obviously organizations that are following HIPAA rules already know how they're supposed to be handling PHI. But if they don't have somebody making sure that, whether it's a vendor or a provider or whoever is responsible for HIPAA in the organization, making sure that anything that they add is being handled the same way, then that's where you can get into trouble. Just like we were just talking about, somebody might be entering PHI into a system that they don't even realize that the AI is consuming that, like we were just talking about with having a personal ChatGPT open on a work device. So I think that's where it becomes even more important to know what's in your environment and limit it only to something like an approved healthcare vendor, because they are releasing a lot of really cool and really helpful AI tools to speed up how patient care and deliver great outcomes, which that's the thing that everyone wants out of AI, is for it to be something that delivers a better experience for customers or for users of it. And obviously healthcare is an area where everyone wants to be more healthy or to have things be more accurate to avoid any sort of medical issues. So if it's implemented in the right way, I think it doesn't create any more or less risk than exists today.
Yeah, that's good perspective, because I think one of the biggest things to hit healthcare across multiple types of specialties is the AI scribing that is now really driving a better patient experience, better patient outcomes, and a better clinician experience, where you've got clinicians with these crazy stories about how they no longer have to chart at home and all these wonderful things. But those tools have been built with HIPAA in mind and PHI in mind, and that's a very different use case than others that haven't. So in construction and professional services, then they don't carry that same regulatory kind of teeth, if you will. So does that mean there's less risk, or there's just less visibility into it?
Yeah, unfortunately, regulation can be obviously a good and a bad thing. And these non-regulated industries have just as much or more risk for all the reasons that Jeff was talking about earlier, with things like, the speed of attacks or exposing information that can damage the business in some way. It's just not something that they necessarily have to notify or could get sued over potentially. So I think there's a ton of risk to those businesses, whether they realize it or not. It's just maybe not a risk in the same way as a regulated industry from a notification and a liability standpoint.
Absolutely. Okay, we're to the part of the conversation that is honestly my favorite part of these kinds of conversations, because this is where we get really tangible for the folks that are on today and start talking about, okay, great. What do we do starting Monday morning that's different, or what's our takeaway from this conversation? So, Jeff, I want to start with you. If a business leader wanted to put one governance guardrail in place this month, what would you tell them to do first?
So I think from our perspective, at least my perspective, is we do AI readiness assessments, right? So those AI readiness assessments look at a variety of different things, to include governance, to include controls, to include your data, to include your leadership buy-in, right? So do you have like some sort of a change management process, are all things that we look at. It's based on the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technologies, AI RMM tool, risk management tool, essentially. So anyway, it's interesting. So you look at across all of those, what's the one or two things that is generally out of those assessments that we get? Number one is policy. So most folks don't have a policy, which will stipulate, hey, don't use your personal stuff at work, right? So that would be the policy, and then enforcing the policy is generally the first two. And if I only had one, it would be write the policy, right? Two, you write the policy and then put the controls in place. And then number three is get your data, right? So, which is sometimes really challenging for small and medium businesses because you got data all over the place. But once you got those three are almost always findings that we have for this AI readiness assessment to help folks mature.
Awesome. Okay, so Stephen, how do you put that guardrail in place without killing the productivity gains that everyone's really excited about?
Yeah, I think I got excited too and skipped ahead to this in one of my answers previously.
That's okay.
Bringing it out into the open. I mean, we have a lot of organizations asking us for training on AI, and I think it's because they want to enable their people on the right things to do. But I think it's not necessarily training. It's helping to identify some of those productivity gains that everyone's excited about and make sure that people know that it's okay. It's okay to do this. We just have to do it in a right way. And sometimes, and I think this is where we're driven by other people's interests on returning investments, most notably the AI companies. That doesn't mean it has to be done fast. It can be done in a slow, smooth manner because you're going to see more tangible results and quicker results if you do it that way than waking up tomorrow and saying, I want to get everyone in the organization a Claude license and lock down the Claude instance and everything will be safe. Let's put some governance guardrails in place. Let's make sure that we have a vision for where we're going as an organization and a strategy. And then let's make sure that everyone in the organization shares that vision and that strategy and knows that we're going to listen to them and build trainings and enablement that's going to help them to use the tools in the right way to get those results that everyone wants.
Absolutely. So for both of you, I'm curious how we involve IT and security in these conversations at the right point, whether that's they need to be at the start of every conversation or when do we know when to bring them in, but how do we get that part right?
Selfishly, I'd just say as soon as possible. It's always on our side when we get brought into something that we could have helped with after it's already far down the track. So even if it's hey, here are the things that we're thinking about, what's your advice or guidance? That's where we excel. We're not going to necessarily tell people this is exactly the playbook, this is how you have to do it, because it is such a evolving new industry and it can be so different depending on a lot of different factors. But what we are going to be able to do is a lot of the conversation we had here today around here's some things that we're seeing working, here's some things to watch out for. Let us know where your head's at, what you are being told by your employees, by your industry, and let us partner with you and guide you along that journey.
Yeah, I know I would echo what Stephen says, but having been a CISO and a CIO, so as a CISO, it was like, we wanted to be in everything. We wanted to be in the DevSecOps. We wanted to be in the path to production of any piece of equipment, hardware, software, et cetera, that was being done so we could bake in the security as it was being built. And it would frustrate me to no end when you'd be in a briefing with the leadership of the board and they're like, hey, we got this great new tool and it's doing this and this. And you're like, whoa. You find out as the last person, as a CISO, it would drive me crazy, right? So as a CIO, you're trying to bridge between the security side and the business side and really trying to use the tools to back that. And if the CIO generally is a great spot where they can embed that, they generally control the path to production, at least in some sense. So having the right people in the right room and having security embedded in, it's no longer a want to do because the exploits, even all the way down to the software code, like Meet is able to find flaws and errors in code of whatever you're building, right? So that includes AI tools and scripts. And so it's able to find those and exploit them, right? Which is why that's such a powerful tool. And that's we're just getting started in that space. You're going to see a lot more of that. So having security baked in is going to get more and more important, in my opinion. It's not going to be a nice to do anymore. It's going to be part of what you have to do in order to secure your intellectual property, your crown jewels, and in a sense, your growth for your business.
For sure. So for folks that are on the call right now, this is a great time. If you have a question you've been wanting to drop in chat and you haven't had a chance to do it, drop it there now and we'll take some questions. But I want to start with one that's pretty open-ended for either one of you, or really both of you, because I'm curious, what is one AI myth that you wish would die? We hear a lot of them.
I would love to hear your answer.
Yeah, I think that for me, one of the big myths is AI is going to solve everything for you, right? So it's Claude is amazing at what it can do, right? And we've experimented, played around with all the different tools at this point now, with a lot of them, the big ones in particular, trying to figure out how do we get the most productivity gains. what's secure, what's not secure in our labs here. So it's been interesting, but at the end of the day, understanding the data is still really important. And what you can and can't do is going to be derived in large part based on the quality of the data that you have. All the way back to when we value companies now. So we do a lot of due diligence for companies. And one of the things that we're finding is a lot of the private equity firms that we work with are going, hey, what is the value of the data that they have? Which 2 years ago, I suppose we talked a little bit about it, but you can quantify it now and go, that database is worth a lot, especially when combined with the power of AI. So on one part, it can solve everything. The other part is the additive components of some of the parts and pieces of AI and what it can bring to the table have far exceeded my expectations.
Awesome.
I think for me, it may not be a myth, it may just be an observation, but I feel like people are choosing an AI tool, and I feel like maybe don't understand that these models that are running in Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini or any of these other things are available in more secure tools. So you don't have to choose the tool that you use in your personal life, in your business life. We just talked about how that can even be dangerous if you're using a public and a approved work version of the same tool. But there are a lot of tools out there now that are more secure, that have exactly the same models, and in some ways are better because they provide all of those models in a single interface instead of needing to bounce between different companies as one gets better than the other. They're in this giant arms race right now where they're all copying and trying to one up each other on things. And I see a lot of following the trends instead of taking a step back and saying, how can we get the kind of best of breed model in a more secure interface?
Definitely. If we can then also shift back to the client work that both of our organizations do, because I'm curious from both of you, when a client comes to you and says I want to do something with AI, whatever that is, fill in the blank, what's one of the first questions that you start to ask somebody who's considering doing something with AI or trying to bring it in and roll it out more formally in their organization?
Yeah, it's really just establishing what they want out of it. I think most customers, at least that I've worked with, they actually don't want AI. They want to solve their problems. And that's another one that I almost was going to say with a myth. I think a lot of times people confuse AI and automation, where some of the automations that they want have existed for a long time. And maybe even in tools like Microsoft 365, they already pay for. So they don't need to use AI. What they need to do is establish their vision or identify what their problems are, and then lean on or partner with somebody who can then take that, just like you would with, if you say, I want to build a house, you don't just start putting blocks and dirt and all of a sudden like building a house. You design layouts, pick out the colors, you do all these things, and then you build the house. So I think it's the same way with AI or any of these things. Identify what the problems are, what people's vision or strategy is for how they think those problems should be solved, do some workshops or have some conversations that develop that strategy, and then go start implementing some of those AI or automation tools. That's the way that you'll see value out of it, rather than just running off and buying a tool and start asking it questions one night.
Let's see.
Yeah, our advisors, we have a PhD in AI on our team, and I think I don't want to speak for her, but I think she would say understanding the outcomes, to your point, Stephen, is a really big key. There's a lot of capabilities that are built in and can be built in, but it takes, like, what is the outcome you're trying to achieve from it is the key, right? And I think talking to like one of the folks that we spend a fair amount of time with ran at Intel for a while, or at least helped build the use cases at the outputs there, and watching all of the failures of like being able to put a bunch of money behind it to try and build those use cases was very fascinating to hear, and the successes, right? What came out of it. But it was the well-defined, had some sort of a change management process around it to understand it, to integrate it back into the business, and then formalize it. Getting leadership buy-in is also very important, right? And then I think for small and medium businesses, probably what's most important is understanding what tool works the best, right? So in what space. And I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that, Julian, what we've found from our experience and from experience across 1,000-ish clients, right? It's been interesting to watch because there are certain things that work well in certain areas. So in particular, I think the most important thing from a getting started perspective is pick the tool, right? but pick the enterprise tool, because what happens if you try and do it like with an individual account, so that information gets spread out. So the enterprise accounts generally are put in a bucket and they're protected data, which is a bit different approach than when you have like your personal chat GPT, which is not bucketed or put in a secure environment. So knowing that going in, that if you're going to do it with an enterprise account, either with Claude, ChatGPT, or Microsoft Copilot's a little bit different because it's wrapped in a Microsoft environment from a security perspective, which is really good. Some of the other ones aren't, but the enterprise accounts generally are. So
interesting. Love that. Okay, as we're getting close to close, and I want to ask you guys to close us out with a closing thought here in a minute. But before we do, I just want to follow up for everyone on with a few ways that you can follow up with us if you have additional questions after this session, or any of this kind of piqued your interest and you're wondering how to action some of this or do this better or even work with a partner. The easiest way is going to be that you're all going to hear from us after this, where we're going to send you the follow-up. And so if you hit reply to that email, we're going to make sure you get to the right person and have that conversation. So if this has been interesting to you and you're wondering how to do some of this more safely in your own organization, look for that email. I've also, and I believe it should be in your sidebar, but this will also go in your email. Entech has provided their AI governance playbook. And so I think that will be a really helpful resource for anyone that's been on this call, as well as we will include our AI threat report that we published earlier this year as well. So just wanted to let everyone know before they hop off how they'll hear from us and how to move forward if they think that they can use a partner and how to implement AI more safely or strategically in their organizations. And with that, as we get close to wrapping, I just want to open it up, Jeff and Stephen, to both of you for one closing thought. If somebody only remembered one thing from your conversation today, what do you hope they take away from this?
Go ahead, Joe.
I think AI is changing the game at a speed we've never seen before. And a practical approach to this looks a lot like hard work at the beginning, getting the foundation set up correctly, right? So get the policies in place, get the controls in place, and get your data cleaned up, right? So if I were to one thing, lay that foundation is going to set you up for years of success using AI and really harvesting the benefits that AI can bring to your organization. So focusing on that is my biggest hit, an area that both Stephen and I help in, right? In trying to get organizations ready for that, being able to really use that data to the max extent possible.
Awesome.
Yeah, I would say some of the poll questions were illuminating. If you don't have an AI strategy today, if you don't have governance, if you don't have an idea of where to start, it doesn't have to be CyberLeaf or Entech. Work with somebody who can help you, because to Jeff's point, it's not slowing down, it's not going away. If anything, it's accelerating. And most people know that there's something they need to do, but they might not know where to start and don't navigate that alone. There's plenty of resources and help out there. And the thing that I love to see is when businesses are thriving and succeeding. And the worst thing I hate to see is when businesses have a cybersecurity incident or an outage of some sort that could have been prevented. And I think AI is getting to that point of that you can't bury your head in the sand on it. You have to have some strategy and some governance and some planning going.
Definitely. Appreciate that. All right, that brings us to the end of this conversation, and it has been just as enjoyable as I thought it was going to be, and really interesting to hear two different perspectives on this. For everyone that joined us live, thank you for hopping on. Really appreciate the participation in the chat and the questions. Like I said, look for our follow-up, and we'll make sure to get you to the right person. Jeff and Stephen, thanks for taking time to be on here today and for prepping this conversation. I really appreciate it. And with that, we can wrap up today, and hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you very much, Julie and Stephen.
Everyone.
Thanks all.